Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're looking into something really quite fascinating. It's the descriptions of early human development, embryology, but as found in the Quran.
Right, specifically Surah al-Mu'minun, verses 12 to 14.
Exactly. And we're sort of exploring this through a discussion we looked at featuring Imran and Dr. Aisha Rahman, who's an embryologist.
Yeah, quite the expert perspective there.
So our goal really is to unpack the connections they found between this, well, ancient text and modern science. Find those moments that make you go, ooh, wow.
Those aha moments.
Yeah, we'll focus on those specific verses. The original discussion actually had the Arabic and English, which adds a whole other dimension. So let's get into it.
Well, what's interesting right off the bat is just this conversation happening at all.
How so?
You've got a 7th century religious text and, modern embryology, a field that's really only come into its own much more recently.
That's true.
It kind of speaks to this fundamental need we have, I think, to understand where we come from using all sorts of perspectives.
Absolutely. A perfect place to start then is the very, very beginning. The discussion started with this Quranic term, nutfa.
Nutfa, yeah. Dr. Rahman explained it translates to something like a sperm drop.
And here's maybe the first little aha for you listening. Back in 7th century Arabia, the common idea was that the whole baby just came from the male semen.
You're right, the entirety of it.
But the Quran specifically says a tiny drop. It feels like a more refined picture, even back then.
That's a really key distinction. A tiny drop. We now know that's the zygote, basically.
Okay.
And what's more, the verse mentions this drop needs a firm lodging.
The uterus.
Exactly. Imran and Dr. Rahman connected that to the uterus, the womb. And if you think about modern science like IVF,
In vitro fertilization.
yeah, that process really highlights how crucial it is for the fertilized egg to implant in the uterine wall. Without that firm lodging, well, there's no pregnancy.
It makes that phrase, firm lodging, seem incredibly precise, doesn't it?
It does. It really underscores the accuracy.
And Dr. Roman also brought up something about Aristotle, how the Quran might be subtly correcting him.
Well, yeah, it seems that way. Aristotle apparently believed semen directly formed bones, like straight away.
Okay.
But the Quran, by focusing on this nutfa, needing that specific environment, that firm lodging, before talking about other stages, it suggests a more complex process.
So not just poof, bones from semen.
Exactly. It implies steps, stages, which naturally makes you wonder, where did that insight come from back then?
Okay, so building from that tiny drop, the discussion moved on to the next stage.
Alaka.
This one's really interesting because the word itself has layers of meaning.
Oh, like what?
It can mean a clot, something that clings, and also something suspended.
Clinging, suspended, clot. Okay. And how does that link to development?
Well, it's actually quite remarkable. Around the 3rd week, the embryo literally implants into the uterine wall. It, clings. It clings, matching the word.
Precisely. And the discussion even mentioned how the early blood circulation system in the embryo looks a bit like, well, a leech.
A leech. Okay, that's striking. And alaqua can mean leech, too.
That's another understanding of the word, yes. So you have clinging and this visual resemblance to a leech.
Wow. And what about the suspended part?
That seems to fit later on, when the embryo is suspended in the amniotic fluid connected by the umbilical cord.
So one word seems to capture quite a bit of this early phase.
It really does. And they brought in a quote from Dr. Keith Moore. He's a major figure in embryology.
What did he say?
Essentially that this level of correlation, this accuracy, couldn't just be guesswork from the 7th century.
That's a strong statement from someone like him. Makes you really pause.
It certainly does. Dr. Moore's view adds a lot of weight. It pushes you to ask, how could they have known this without microscopes, without our modern tools?
So from clinging, we move on. The next stage discussed was muga.
Muga, yes.
Which translates as chewed lump. I have to say, it doesn't sound very appealing initially.
No, I get that reaction. It sounds a bit strange. But here's where the science is fascinating.
Okay.
Around day 26 or so, these structures called somites start forming. Think of them as like little blocks that will eventually become muscles and vertebrae.
Right, building blocks.
And visually, these segmented blocks on the surface of the embryo, they genuinely look like teeth marks, like on a piece of gum you've chewed.
Oh, okay, I see the connection now. Chewed lump makes visual sense then.
Really does. But there's another layer to muga, too.
Go on.
Dr. Rahman pointed out that the word in Arabic also carries a sense of malleability, like something pliable, easily shaped.
Malleability.
And that fits perfectly because during this stage, the embryonic tissues are undergoing massive reshaping. Everything's changing rapidly, forming different organs.
So the word captures both the look and the dynamic nature of that state.
Exactly. It's quite clever, really.
So we've got sperm drop, then clinging clot or leach, then this chewed lump. The sequence itself is described. But then they tackled something I've heard debated before.
What's that?
The Quran's apparent order of bones before flesh. Isn't it seen as, like, scientifically backward sometimes?
Yes. That's been a point of criticism in the past. People assumed bones meant hardened, calcified bone, like in an adult.
Right. And we know muscles develop too.
But modern embryology shows us something interesting. Cartilage forms first. It's like a template, a model for the skeleton.
Okay, cartilage first.
Then the muscles and flesh develop around this cartilage framework. So if you understand bones in the verse as referring to this initial cartilaginous skeleton,
Then bones before flesh actually works.
it aligns quite well with the scientific sequence. Cartilage template first, then muscle development around it. It's another one of those surprising alignments.
That definitely reframes the old criticism. And they mentioned, didn't they, that ancient Egyptians thought the heart formed first.
Yeah, which science later showed wasn't the case. The developmental sequence is quite specific.
And Dr. Rahman also touched upon the Quran mentioning a new creation phase later on, something about the soul.
Yes, referencing another surah, As-Sajda, verse 9, it talks about God fashioning the human being and breathing his spirit into them.
Which takes us beyond purely biological description.
It does. That moves more into the realm of theology and philosophy when life begins in a spiritual sense. But the accuracy of the physical descriptions leading up to that point kind of lends context to those verses, too.
So, pulling this all together, what were the main takeaways from this whole discussion between Imran and Dr. Rahman? They seem to land on three big implications.
The first, and probably the one that jumps out most, is the argument for divine origin. Meaning that the level of detail, the accuracy of these embryological stages described in a 7th century text. Well, the argument is that this knowledge wasn't available through human means back then.
So it points towards a source beyond human knowledge of the time.
That's the core argument, yes. That this information itself is a sign.
Okay. What was the second point?
It touched on ethics, specifically around abortion.
How so?
The perspective offered was that when the Quran describes the embryo with such purpose and detail, right from being a clinging clot, it inevitably raises questions about the value of that life and when it truly begins.
So it informs the ethical discussion.
Right. It provides a framework from that text perspective. The discussion wasn't pushing a specific stance, more highlighting how these descriptions feed into that very complex ethical debate.
Got it. And the third takeaway?
This was about the humility of science, perhaps, or maybe the harmony between science and faith.
Okay.
The idea that as science progresses, as we learn more through microscopes and imaging, we keep finding that these discoveries seem to align with or confirm statements made in the Quran centuries ago.
Like science is catching up in a way.
You could put it like that. They included a quote from another scientist, Dr. E. Marshall Johnson.
What did he say?
It was quite direct. I see God's hand here.
Wow, that's powerful coming from a scientist studying development.
It is. And it connects to another verse Dr. Rahman mentioned from Surah Fusilat, verse 53. We will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves.
Within themselves,
Yeah.
like within our own bodies.
Exactly, pointing to the human body itself as a place to see these signs or miracles.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive into that discussion really highlights a remarkable parallel, doesn't it, between these Quranic verses and what modern embryology tells us.
It's quite extraordinary when you lay it out. It definitely prompts you, the listener, to think about just how complex our own beginnings are.
And how accurately it seems they were described so long ago.
It encourages you to ponder that relationship, between knowledge from revelation and knowledge from scientific discovery. Can they coexist? Can they complement each other?
Absolutely. When you really consider those details, the nutfa drop, the alaka clinging and leash-like stage, the muga chewed lump with somites, that sequence of cartilage then muscle, and how these ancient terms seem to map so well onto modern understanding. It leaves you with quite a lot to mull over.
It really does. It brings us back to that final thought from the source material they discussed.
Which one?
The simple but profound idea that your own body, the one you're sitting in right now, is, in its very creation and detail, well, a walking miracle.
A walking miracle. That's definitely something to reflect on personally.